Alright. Okay. This is one of those where I almost honestly am not even sure where to start or how to finish. Apparently, whatever manufacturing method was used to put a fake BIOS into this card cannot be undone without an actual EEPROM writer. And presently, uh, let me find it again. Control H. Own Banggood. Yeah, I can pick up a CH341A A425 series EPROM flash BIOS USB programmer and hard reprogram the EPROM that's actually on the display adapter. Now, there are a number of different problems in flight because of the way this board has been fixed. First of all, is it is being locked to a driver. I have to disable the driver in order to access the card. I am unable to turn the write protection off. And as I scroll up here, you can see from the spam that I have been trying for a while on this approach. I have tried going in through a FreeDOS disk. The card is not visible under FreeDOS. And my cat has chosen now to walk off. All right. So, uh, so where this leaves me is kind of frustrated. I'm really not willing to spend the extra money to buy the physical hardware to reprogram this. And also, even if I do that, I don't have a good way. Right now, I don't have an APU, so I can run an integrated graphics card so that I can see what I'm doing to fix the graphics card that needs to be fixed. Okay, let me rephrase it, because there is an APU sitting around here somewhere, but it's for a, oh, it's old enough that I no longer have a motherboard, for it. What was the first AMD APU socket? AMD APU sockets. Okay, what was it? Yano, socket. Okay, socket. Okay, socket FM1. I, uh, the only APU I have is for a socket FM1, and, I do not have a socket FM1 or socket FM2 or socket FM2 plus motherboard hanging around anymore. I've given them all away. So I don't. So in order to fix this graphics card, I would need to spend money on an APU or on another graphics card so that I can disable the driver and work on the graphics card with the driver disabled and unloaded. I would need to purchase EEPROM writing software not software, EEPROM writing hardware, and then I would have to have the correct software. So even though I could reprogram this, and even though I think I have narrowed this card down to it's either an Axle or a Zotac, uh, this is a significant. I'm basically going to be spending as much for an APU that I would buy, and any APU that I could buy right now. If I go to AMD.com, direct buy, I can pick up the 5600G for $260. And that integrated processor would probably outrun the GTS 450. So, I've kind of at the point where I've sunk too much time, too much effort. This is not an easy fix. I got taken in by a scam. The only thing I can really do, or realistically do, is leave a review on the AliExpress vendor where I bought it from. Now, I am going to caveat here, I am not convinced that the vendor was aware that they were selling a fake product. Uh, and I'm going to caveat it like that, and that it would be very difficult. The thing is, this is an incredibly involved, incredibly nuanced, explicit sabotage attempt to create a product. This is somebody who had the technical skills and the equipment on hand to reprogram a GTS 450, make it work, make it turn on, make it power up with an incorrect identifier, with an incorrect memory count, and not have it blow up. So this is not a fly by night operation to make this kind of card. Now, from a legal perspective, I can't say who I am 99% certain is responsible for creating these products. I would say that if the United States had a competent trade administration, I would be submitting this as evidence to at least the state's attorney to keep track of in order to build a federal case against a ostensibly a United States company. So given that there's only three companies that I've listed here, the name of the card and the OEM ODM vendors who I think the card came from, only one of them based in the US. So who wrote the firmware to begin with? Who made this possible? It wasn't the CCP. I'm pretty sure it wasn't Zotac. And I definitely know Axel doesn't have that kind of staff on hand. So who else touched the card? Oh, that's right. Starts with an N and ends with an A. And there's a something in the middle there. You can't quite put my finger on it. It's colored green, but that's the point. I got taken in by a scam. Okay, maybe I should have been more aware looking at the price. It was too good to be true, but so many different factors going on. There are legitimate 1050s being dumped because they are at end of life cycle for Bitcoin mining. And I said it before. What I wanted to do with this system originally is I wanted to put an Intel Arc graphics card in here. I wanted this to be an all Intel system. And right now, that still is the shorter term goal. I don't know how close Arc is to launching. Uh, I would it's my plan right now is I can't realistically return this card. The return shipping to send it back would cost as much as I originally paid for it to begin with. Second, for everything else, it does at least give me a display, a VESA capable display. So I can at least get into a system This does at least give me a backup display if everything else failed. Now, it may not do any kind of 3D rendering, and if you try to pass it any kind of 3D load because of that memory miscalculation, it just crashes out and go boom. But this does not change the stance on the upstream design vendor, whoever signed off on this. Now, I am going to say from a general perspective, and this advice is really aimed at Intel. So Intel, if you're listening, this is for you. There are hostile programmers out there. There are hostile upstreams. There are hostile downstreams. There are hostile ODMs. There are hostile OEMs. They will not always have the best interest of the original vendor in mind. Sometimes they may work with the original vendor. Sometimes they may work against the original vendor. The best way to protect consumers against issues like this, where a upstream or downstream takes a product, replaces the firmware on it, rewrites the firmware on the product, and makes it essentially useless. Always leave an out through the driver system. Always leave a user-definable method of rewriting and restoring the firmware on a device to a vendor defined range. In the case of graphic card, there's a range of different clocks that they can run at. Set up a default firmware that can be hard loaded, that cannot be bypassed. It needs an OEM key, or not an OEM key, needs a vendor key. So in Intel, in the case of ARC graphic processors that have a firmware component, make sure that the firmware cannot be locked out and that the users always have a way to unlock the firmware and load an Intel defined firmware. Because if the vendor of this card, Nvidia, had a utility on Nvidia.com that would allow me to install a reference firmware regardless of whoever manufactured the card, be it Asus, Abit, give me a second while I think of someone, as I think of discontinued vendors. I don't think DFI ever made graphic card, but being if Intel lets you put a reference firmware or a reference reference BIOS or reference UEFI on a DFI board with an Intel chipset, you could that opens up longer term support options, and more importantly, that also puts future support on the hands of users. Intel has a very strong open source. You have the Intel Open Source Technology Center, making it so that the firmware or the BIOS, whatever the low level tech, can be rewritten or updated, gives a lot more freedom to users after if the vendor goes out of business. Users still have the option to, if there's something that needs to be patched, fixed, or dealt with, the users still have an option into that. So that's my advice to Intel, is make sure that this kind of stunt can never happen on an Intel Arc graphics card. So that's what I've got for now. I am going to right now just leave this in the system because it's the only spare graphics card that I've got, even if it's even if it's little more than a paperweight. I will not be comparing it to the Steam Deck, at least not until I get a different graphics card in there. And that's really all I've got for now. So I'll catch you